All right, hello and welcome to Argo Vermeer. I'm Argo Vermeer. This is my YouTube channel. Hashtag collectivism kills, hashtag the truth you will reject. And today I thought that we would take a break from government and at least dealing directly with collectivist metaphysics and individualist metaphysics, or metaphysics in general specifically. And I'm going to read from an article I did on my blog, which is unreformingtheology.com, where in addition to dissecting the many rational fallacies and rational abominations of Reformed theology and Christian doctrine, the Christian metaphysical lens, since Christianity was synthesized with the state of Rome, I talk about stuff like this. Government, science, scientific determinism, politics, various kinds of isms, communism, capitalism, fascism, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in any of that, you can check out that blog. But today I'm going to read this article from unreformingtheology.com, which I wrote about a year and a half ago, called Scientism: When Science Becomes a Clumsy and Dangerous Religion. Because that's what scientism is. You see, science, when it starts to speak on things like the beginning of everything, and the nature of truth, or the lack thereof, and things like consciousness, when science wades into the field of metaphysics or philosophy, it becomes rank mysticism. It becomes, not only does it become a religion in its own right, but it becomes a very clumsy one, and a very obvious determinist. It's a very obvious determinist and obviously rationally inconsistent, mystic, cult-like ideology. It's not even a good religion, sort of scientism. And so when science steps out of the realm of where it actually is relevant and functional, which is simply dealing with the ways in which man observes his environment to move relative to him, when it steps out of the realm of dealing strictly with what man observes, and it begins to look at what man is and what everything is, what its nature is, its beginnings, the value of truth, the existence of truth, the existence of ethics, the existence of consciousness, the efficacy of consciousness. When science starts to wade into these kinds of areas, it becomes a rank mystic cult that's not hard to see. The problem I have with atheists is atheists are usually scientific determinists who either don't know it or who don't think scientific determinism is in fact a religion that appeals to the same sort of godlike metaphysical primary that they pretend to dislike in orthodox religions like Christianity. Atheists almost certainly are really scientific determinists. They are mystic cult members wrapped in the garb of scientific rationalism. The reason why atheists never want to argue, there's two reasons why atheists don't want to argue the metaphysics. Well, three reasons. One is they don't understand that debates about God are in fact a metaphysical argument. So if you're going to debate the existence of God, you have to understand what God means, which I've said before, God is a metaphysical primary. God represents that from which all things are either implied or a direct function. So if you're going to debate that metaphysical primary is a false metaphysical primary, you have to have your own. So they don't understand this. So they want people like Christians to concede that they are on the hook to bring evidence for God to the atheist, not understanding that in order for the atheist to define evidence, he has to have an understanding of what exactly is that which exists. So what is that from which evidence would be derived? Meaning, how does the atheist define the nature of what exists and where it comes from in order that they may have a plumb line called proof and evidence? So they don't understand that for the Christian to concede that it is on the Christians, that it is the Christian's obligation to provide evidence, that the Christian, once he assumes that the atheist has a rational definition of a rational definition of evidence, the Christian has already lost the argument, you see, because to concede the atheist definition of evidence is to implicitly concede the atheist interpretation of what reality is and where it comes from. So, in what reality is and where it comes from with the atheist is almost always rooted in some kind of scientific mysticism, scientific determinism, where the roots of reality, such as mathematics and the laws of nature, that kind of thing, these sort of ethereal, non-observable, non-objectively existent, transcendent, divine, albeit blind, watchmaker-type deities, create everything out of themselves and then govern it according to some predetermined plan. So, so the reason is that either atheists do not understand that having a debate about God is to have a metaphysical argument, or they don't want to argue their metaphysics because they know they're untenable, and they have just as much metaphysical anxiety as most of the Christians. See, most of the Christians I ran into never wanted to debate God because they really didn't understand what God was. Well, the fundamental reason is that Christianity, as you most likely understand it, and as it is understood doctrinally, at least on the whole in the West, and probably in the East. I'm not an expert on Eastern Christianity, like East Orthodox churches, but there's a lot of metaphysical anxiety in Christianity because fundamentally the metaphysics of Christianity are irrational. They're the idea of what God is, how he relates to man, how he creates everything, are just simply rationally inconsistent, and therefore by necessity and by extension, they don't have a rational sort of way to evangelize God. It's all a matter of blind faith. Well, scientific determinists are the exact same way. Scientific determinists don't have any other rational explanations for how their metaphysics create anything that they see or that they would consider to be objective. So it's either that they don't understand that they're having a metaphysical debate and want to keep pretending that they're not. See, atheists always want to have an epistemological debate. They don't understand they're having a metaphysical debate, which makes debating with atheists, if you're a Christian, completely pointless, because they don't even know what the fuck the debate's about. And this is why I don't talk to atheists, because they either don't understand. I'd say most of them don't understand. The other half don't want to defend their own metaphysics because the laws of nature are not a rational metaphysical primary. The Big Bang is not a rational metaphysical primary either. You simply don't get something from nothing. That's the same problem the Christians run into. God creates ex nihilo. God creates everything from nothing, but that's a contradiction. And as a contradiction, your consciousness has no frame of reference for it. You can't conceptualize a contradiction, and therefore you could not observe one. It's not possible. But it's the same thing. God creates everything ex nihilo, out of nothing. Well, nothing doesn't exist, so by definition you can't create anything out of that which doesn't exist in the first place. It's not there to create anything out of, which means that everything comes out of God himself, which means everything is a direct extension of God, in which case, where does the plurality come from? How do you get the observer-observed distinction? Where's the distinction between the consciousness which observes via the senses and that which it is observing? You see, the problem with the Big Bang and the laws of nature, they run into the same problem that Christians do metaphysically, is they have no way to account for a plurality of existence. And basically it boils down to you get everything out of nothing. So they either don't know it's a metaphysical argument, or they can't defend their metaphysics, or there was another reason. I can't remember. I babbled too long. I don't want to say babbling. This is good stuff to understand, but There was a third reason. It doesn't come to me. They either don't want to discuss the metaphysics, they don't understand it's a metaphysical debate, or I don't know. I have no idea. I forget what the third one is. But at any rate, we're going to talk about why science, when it steps out of line, which is science is nothing more than a methodology. It's simply a methodology for observing patterns in man's environment, which would include his body, and then abstracting these patterns into formulas. So creating some kind of a language for the patterns man observes in reality, and then taking this language and being able to sort of to use this sort of abstract language for how we observe reality to function relative to our observational consciousness, to use these patterns to create some kind of a formula, some kinds of codes, some kind of mathematical language, which we can then use to sort of conceptually organize that which we observe. And this can be practical for many ways, in exploration, in industry, in how governments operate. There's all kinds of ways that you can take these sort of mathematical patterns that we make out of that which we observe, and then organize what we observe in ways that help us to create and organize our environment in ways that most promote us. That's all science is. Science is simply a methodology. Science is simply observing the relative movement of objects we observe in our environment relative to our consciousness, recognizing patterns, creating abstract formulas, mathematical language, as it were, out of these patterns, and then using these patterns as a means to modify and create our own environments. That's all science is. Science is simply practical. It's not philosophical. It has nothing to do with metaphysics. It has nothing to do with epistemology. It has nothing to do with ethics. It has absolutely nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with art. It is simply a practical way, one of many practical ways, albeit very important and very complex, practical way that man organizes that which he observes. That's all science is. And when it steps out of its boundaries and pretends to be something that it's not, it quickly becomes an irrational, cult-like mystic religion, whose failure is so obvious and perfunctory that it doesn't actually surprise me that it escapes the notice of those who lead in promoting it. It's like the truth right in front of your face that you can't see because it's so obvious that you can never believe that this actually could be the truth. Science is so complicated and mathematics are so complicated, and the people that are involved in science are so brilliant and their IQs are so high that surely these are the people that we should be placing in charge of how we interpret the value of our reality, and in describing the nature of what man is and what his aspirations should be, and how he should define his very existence, and the values and the ethics to which he should subscribe, to organize this. Surely these people are so brilliant. Surely they're high-minded, highly complex fields of study could not translate into some clumsy, base, useless, necessarily self-destructive and destructive in general cult-like mystic religion that a 10-year-old could understand wouldn't work. Surely not. And so we don't believe it. We don't believe it. We think that, sure, scientists as not Brett Weinstein, what's his brother's name? Eric Weinstein. There's a way that you pronounce that the Stein part of a Jewish name that's offensive, and I really apologize if I get it wrong. There's a way that I feel like Jewish people find offensive if you say it the wrong way. I can't remember if it's Steen or Stein. That's my own failure. Anyway, I think it's Eric Weinstein. I think it's Steen is the one that is not offensive to say. Maybe neither one of them are offensive. I don't know. I don't know. I should probably know this. But anyway, so Eric Weinstein, make the scientist your new make them like a priest class. Make them untouched. You can't tax them. You can't dox them. Well, you can't touch them. Make them basically make the scientists the priest class, which is untouchable. Give them grants, give them money, and let them do their job, and they should really be essentially above reproach as long as whatever they do isn't really criminal. You should just accept that these are the geniuses of your society, and they should be given carte blanche to sort of declare truth and demand that the rest of us blind, unwashed masses sort of just follow along with whatever they suggest. As a priest, they are acting in the stead of God, and should be treated as such. Well, this is nonsense. Scientists are not metaphysicians at all. In fact, they go out of their way most of the time to declare they're not, and yet they want to be put in charge of truth and value, which are simply not subjects with which science has any means to deal with. Now, I'll also say, as I continue, and the reason why it's not, you can go to my blog and you can read the article. This article was printed on May 12th, 2023. It's called Scientism, When Science Becomes a Clumsy and Dangerous Religion. And, sorry, I'm in a parking lot again, waiting for one of my kiddos, so you're going to hear the background noise of the city. And apologize for that. It's really loud and annoying sometimes. But at any rate, you can read, but you're going to get a lot more, if you listen, you're going to get a lot more commentary. So there's a lot more. You're going to get longer prologues, and a lot more exegesis. You're going to get a lot more explanation, commentary, expansion, that kind of thing if you actually listen. So that's why I find reading these articles on this YouTube channel to be beneficial, because you just get a lot more information, which I think is good and helpful. And hopefully you do too. It's going to be a more exegetic approach to it, I suppose, which could be good. Now, you have to understand that people who are really good, like the scientists who are in a position to shape public policy, the scientists who are put in positions of defining and describing the secular ethics, quote unquote, with which our non-theocratic governments will act in service to. The people that are put in charge of these scientists, these humanists that are put in charge of these kinds of things, the big names, the ones that are making policy and giving the big speeches, the ones you've heard of, that seem to run so much of our lives, and seem to function, if not officially, certainly significantly, and certainly I would say in some sense, obviously, as the priest class of our political authority. They tell us how we should, or what our values should be: secular, humanist, how we should consider our lives, and to what ideas we should devote our work and our play, and what constitutes truth from the lie. The whole pandemic thing, a few years ago. The big scientist on TV, always telling us to don't just listen to the babbling bobbleheads on your favorite social media site. Turn to us for the truth. Turn away from the disinformation that you might hear on your favorite social media site. Joe Rogan doesn't have enough letters after his name to be able to give you any kind of actually useful information relative. This is a scientific matter, and by God, Joe Rogan is not a scientist, and so better not listen to him. I'm not suggesting you listen to Joe Rogan is fine. I don't think he was necessarily wrong on anything so far, but again, I don't listen that close to Joe Rogan. I'm sure he's wrong. We're all wrong, but I'm not suggesting that Joe Rogan is an authority on this kind of thing. What I'm saying is the idea is don't turn to people who you might usually listen to. This is a scientific matter. Turn to those who know your science. So you have to understand these people who are good at science and math, these people, these are not thinking men and women. Now, let me explain what I mean. These people, these are not philosophers. They're just not. they're not thinking men. They don't think fundamentally. These are analyzers. They are observers. They are examiners. But they're not thinking men and women. In other words, what they're good at is being outside of their own mind. They're good at observing their surroundings and noticing patterns. They're really good at pattern recognition. And they're good at examining things that they observe and plugging them into the corresponding formulas. And they're very good at taking these formulas and applying them to new fields and new things and creating new outcomes by applying these formulas, which are rooted in these observational patterns. And it takes an extraordinarily high IQ to do that. But this is not the same skill as being a thinking man, a thinking person. So you see, a thinking person is someone who examines not things. They're not outside of their own mind. They're very much inside it. In other words, they examine ideas. They look at ideas. They look at claims. And they parse these ideas and claims into their various presuppositions. And they take these presuppositions and they further parse these out into their root assumptions. And then they parse these root assumptions out into their concepts. And then they examine whether or not these concepts actually coincide or correlate, or if somewhere along the way, from the concepts to the fundamental assumptions to the presuppositions to the ideas, if there is some kind of contradiction, some kind of logical inconsistency along the way. So they examine ideas to determine whether they're true or false based purely upon the notion of what assumptions these ideas are built upon and what concepts are used to construct those assumptions and whether or not there are inconsistencies there. That's what a thinking person does. A thinking person or a philosopher comes, and that's how thinking people and philosophers examine ideas and either affirm them, deny them, and or come up with new ones. Now, not all philosophers are right, in the same way not all scientists are right. Not all mathematical formulas work, and not all ideas work either. But you have to understand it's a completely fundamental way, different way of what's the word I'm looking for? Cogitating. It's different. So the philosopher, the thinking person, is very much in their own head. And the scientist is very much outside of themselves. They're very much interested in the environment and things. And the thinking man, the thinking woman is very much interested in ideas. They're interested in playing in the realm of the consciousness and concepts. They're interested in the words, in the language and the ideas and the concepts will formulate that, and the consciousness from which we can observe in the first place. What is the nature of observation, you could say. So the philosopher looks at what does it mean to observe? What is the nature of observation? And the scientist would go, what are we observing? What is a pattern here? And what are some formulas we can use? How can we abstract some formulas? So naturally speaking, the non-thinking men, the analyzers, the examiners, the observers, the observationalists, they're going to be really good at things that are much more, their talents are going to be much more, they're going to represent a much greater, they're going to have a much greater sort of exhibitionist type value. They're really good at games. They're really good at math. They're really good at pattern recognition. They do really good on IQ tests, And they're smart. They're smart, but now you have to understand. Let me give you a little bit about my background. I grew up in a very, very high IQ area. And when I say high, I mean I'm guessing where I grew up was at least the average IQ where I grew up was at least a standard deviation higher than the national average, maybe even higher. I had friends who were easily in the 140s and even 150s. tested, verifiable IQ. I had friends who went to Carnegie Mellon. I had friends who went to technical schools and other Ivy League schools. Some of the jobs that the people where I lived did, that their parents did, were computers, computer systems, computer design, computer programming. A very good friend of mine, his dad was a vice president of a multinational bank, or at least a national bank, but a big bank. Military intelligence. This was back when military intelligence wasn't necessarily an oxymoron. So I'll give you some idea of how old I am. These are just the kinds of people I grew up around. They were very, very high IQ people. My grandfather was a professor at the University of Chicago, which is not an Ivy League school, but it might as well be. Go read the Wikipedia page on the University of Chicago. Might as well be an Ivy League. It's a big school. And then he went on from there to be the dean of a school in a very large university, a very large, well-known university. So I come from fairly high IQ stock as well. And then I have, and my mom's side is basically very similar. But the IQ on I was always more of an ideas person. I wasn't an analyzer. I wasn't an observer. I wasn't an examiner. I wasn't great at pattern recognition, never really good at games or video games. I wasn't into programming. I was more of a thinking person, and my family reflected that. My grandfather, who I just spoke of, was in the humanities, right? Liberal arts side of things. So high functioning, obviously. Being a professor at University of Chicago in anything is no slouch, and then to be the dean of such and so forth at a major state university is also not a slouchy thing. But it wasn't mathematics, so and even my wife is what she does is very highly analytical as well, and I would categorize her as very high IQ in terms of the idea of pattern recognition. She's better than I am. But there's the annoying, unnecessarily loud Harley Davidson in the background. No offense to Harley riders, but those loud pipes are just, they're not, I just don't get it. No offense, but no, I don't want to say that. Anyway, I don't want to alienate. I don't have enough viewers to alienate any of you. Harley riders are great, by the way. I love it. And I love your loud pipes. If you're listening and you have a Harley with loud pipes, you're awesome. And keep them loud. They're great. Ignore what I was going to say. No, they're awesome. No, they're just fine. But I can tell you this, though. These people that I grew up that went to Ivy League schools and Carnegie Mellon and to the tech schools and the PhD physicists that I know and the 150, 140 IQ geniuses I was friends with, these were not thinking men. I'm telling you, because, and I'll say this, these very high IQ people were in some sense outside of that kind of thinking. We were nothing more than your run-of-the-mill rank ideologues. They were basically just dumb ideologues when it came to anything. Some of them were just rank atheists, which is a dumb ideology. It's irrational, but they were committed to atheism, and there was just no discussion. Some of them were Christians. Some of them were Reformed Christians, which is another dumb theology that's rooted in completely incoherent and completely just rational abominations on its face. And these people with 140 were completely devoted. They were completely in the Democrat camp or completely in the conservative camp. Some were communists, some were capitalists. They were just like, they would basically poll like any Tom, Dick, and Jane out there. There was nothing special about them. These people did not examine their fundamental ideological assumptions. They were not interested in examining their ideas. And I submit to you that they wouldn't have known how to. I have had discussions with these people because I am good at ideas. And these people, for example, somebody I'm close to is a PhD chemist, very close to. And I can't talk to him anymore about my voluntarism. My assertion that government represents an illegitimate incarnation, is an illegitimate institute, because it is, frankly, a rank incarnation of collectivist metaphysics, and collectivist metaphysics are false. They are rationally inconsistent, and they are anathema to man's true nature, which is why governments fundamentally have a lifespan. Some shorter, some longer, but they all collapse in basically the same way, no matter which kind of government. There is no governmental solution for the problems of man, because government represents metaphysically the enemy of man's nature. Now, again, as I've said before, I'm a pacifist and a voluntarist, so this is not some kind of screed against your political ruling class as individuals. No. This is about the metaphysics which underwrite the state and which undermine the state always. Okay? So, but I can't have a conversation about voluntarism without him doing what anybody with an IQ 2 standard deviations lower than him makes the same arguments. They go, yeah, but what about? And they proceed to give me some kind of... Sorry, there's somebody playing really loud music. Oh, wait, what is this song? It's a Scorpion song. What is this song? I know I'm boring you. Oh gosh, what's this song, guys? Well, maybe he sits at the light long and, oh no, he's leaving. It'll come to me. Anyway, lost my train of thought. That was definitely, I had that. I Love at First Sting. The Zoo. Yeah, it was. That's what that was. The Zoo. Love at First Sting. Scorpions. Great album. If you like 80s metal, which you should. And you should like Frank Sinatra. And you should like the Beatles. And you should like Chuck Berry. Anyway, this is not a music channel. Okay, so, yeah. So what he'll do is he'll go, well, how are we going to get so-and-so? How are we going to get such and such? How are we going to get, how are we going to make sure that such and such corporation doesn't take all the wealth? How are we going to get all these people to cooperate together so that we have the kind of roads and this kind of schools and so he immediately does the low IQ thing of trying to superimpose the collectivist outcome of modern society, of today's current postmodern America, over individualist metaphysics without ever coming to a consensus on whether or not the metaphysics, meaning the ways in which we define the nature of humanity and reality and how man shall interact with his other fellow man and reality and his environment in a way which is consistent with his true nature, without ever dealing with he's not interested in any of that. He wants me to go and explain to him how I can make 2 + 2 is 5. How I'm going to say we can get exactly what we have now in terms that he thinks are, for example, how are you going to get public utilities, he might say, which in his mind work perfectly well. These public utilities that we have in this government, how are you going to get that if everybody's just free to do whatever they want? You see what I mean? So, in other words, how are you going to get collectivist outcomes from individualist metaphysics? And he doesn't even know he doesn't understand his own collectivist metaphysics. So I'm trying to go, look, we're way down the line. We haven't even come to a consensus on the assumptions about the nature of man. And now you want me to explain to you how my socio-political system is going to produce exactly what you're comfortable with? And this is a guy who I'm sure his IQ is higher than mine, and who is a very, very intelligent and extraordinarily successful chemistry PhD, who works for a very successful company and makes very good money and has for decades. These people are not thinking men. They're not thinking women. They don't think the way that I think and that you and I think. They're not philosophers, you see. And so when I say that scientism, when we let scientists step outside the boundaries of their own ability to, their own talents, their own intellectual talents, you will get rank disaster. And that is the prologue for this upload. Do not assume that because somebody's a PhD in mathematics or biological evolution or physics or chemistry or electrical, that they know anything about the nature of anything. That's not what they're good at. That's not what they do. These are not thinking men and women. These are not ideas men and women. And if you leave your immortal souls in the hands of these people, you will pay the price. And I mean spiritually. If you let these people define the nature of yourself, what you are, what your values should be, how you define truth, what you consider objective truth, what you consider objectively good, and if you put your philosophy in the hands of these people, it is going to be an object disaster that you and your society will not survive. And you have got to stay away from scientism. If you want to be an atheist, but by God, do not be a scientific determinist. Because if that's why you're an atheist, if you're an atheist because you believe that everything is a direct function of the laws of nature or the language of the universe, mathematics, or some kind of completely ethereal, transcendent, albeit scientific force of nature, you are no better. In fact, in many ways, you're much worse than the very religious zealots you claim to despise or disagree with. If you want to be an atheist, that's fine. I'm not sure how that's possible because atheism is not really a thing. If you want to know more of that, you can go listen to my whole series on atheism and why it's completely intellectually bankrupt on every level, because it's a disbelief, and disbelief is not, epistemologically disbelief is nothing. So I'm supposed to argue what I believe for someone who's labels themselves. I'm supposed to argue as a Christian what I believe with someone who comes from a position of disbelief. It's stupid. But by God, if you're an atheist, do not do it based on the idea that you think that science has some kind of metaphysical answers, because it just doesn't. So, at any rate, okay. So, I don't know, I'm already at 37 already. All right, well, it's all good. Now, not that anybody listens anyway. That's not to belittle. I really don't want to belittle those who do listen, because I really appreciate you. The 6 of you, or the 6 views I get, the 1 of you that watches 6 times, or the 6 of you that watch 1 time, I love you all. And look, I'm not a exhibitionist. The value of my ideas and what I do, I don't really, it's not really a function of how many views I get. It's not really a function of numbers. I hate the masses. The idea that I have to, in order for my ideas, what I do to be valuable, is going to depend on some fucking number of people. Like, the larger my number, the more valuable I am. I'm not a communist, but it's just such capitalist bullshit. And I just don't fucking care, It's so annoying. The idea that, and you're going to hear a little bit of disdain in my voice and some loathing. But don't hear what I'm not saying. I like you. I care about you, your capital S self think. You, your individual absolute self, I care what you think. I want you to listen. I covet your attention. I do. But I care about you. There's not a number of yous out there I give a shit about. You can't put a number on what is an absolute self. That's why I always hated that stupid fucking thing in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Logic dictates the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Well, no. Like human life can be boiled down to a numerical value. It's such bullshit. Each one of you is an absolute. You're a singular self. Your value is absolute. One of you is as metaphysically value as a million of you. Nobody should be dying for anybody is the whole fucking point. But the point I'm trying to make is, I don't care about the fucking masses. Yes, higher views would be good because there's more individuals watching, and I like that. But I care about you yourself. I don't care about you as a member of a crowd. I don't give a shit about that. You are a self. You're absolute. There's no fucking number that goes to that. You're just absolute. You're a singularity. You are a metaphysical singularity. And that's my audience. So if it's 6, if it's 3, I don't want it to be 0, but even if it's 0, who knows who might listen to this, But the point is don't worry about masses. Don't worry about having mass appeal. Don't worry about numbers. The idea that human value is found in the number of people. Your value is a function of how many people care about what you do and say. That's not true. What you do and say might be bullshit. It might have no value at all. But it can't be judged by how many people like it. Look how many people like shit. There's shit out there that gets millions of views. It's horrible, but it's not valuable. Not fundamentally. But it has mass appeal. Look, the masses are nothing. The group is nothing. The collective is nothing. The collective always boils down to the lowest common denominator. The collective is always going to be run and governed by those at the very bottom of the bell curve, because the people at the top of the bell curve, in competence and intelligence, the people at the bottom of the bell curve on the left, they can't go higher, but the higher people can go lower. And so if you collectivize yourself, it's always going to cater to the lowest common denominator, which is going to be the least competent, least creative, least intelligent among us. And it's going to turn into some ugly, horrible, chaotic mass. And the idea that that's what I have to appeal to in order for my shit to be valuable is odious to me. So I care about you. I don't care about you as a member of a group. So if it's 6 of you and if it's 1 million, it's all great with me. Economically, the more the merrier, but you don't make money doing this, and I already know that. So I don't even know where I was going with that. But anyway, I think I just wanted to rant. Maybe that's just a huge psychological cope. That's fine if you want to think so. But I realized, sitting around I'm like, wow, I'm getting bummed out by the numbers. And I go, what am I, some kind of a fucking exhibitionist? Like, my value is a function of how many people listen to my videos? Exhibitionism, monetizing exhibitionism is the whole problem with them. That's the whole problem with social media. Everything becomes exhibition. You're of no value unless you can be a spectacle to somebody. And it's not, in the kind of behavior that's a spectacle to the masses it's not quality behavior. You see what I'm saying? I was like, and I started to get mad. I'm like, what? I'm not an exhibitionist. I'm a philosopher, or like to think I am. So whether it's 6 people or whether it's 6 million, I'm going to do this. So, all right. Well, we're going to start this. We're now 42 minutes in. I'm going to get probably through 1 paragraph, but that's all right. We got time, and I'm not going anywhere, and hopefully you're not going anywhere, but maybe you will. So we'll get through it. So this is scientism, when science becomes a clumsy and dangerous religion. Okay. Science is fine as science. And what science is a methodology man uses to describe various relative relationships between objects, between himself and objects, between himself and others, etc. he observes in his environment. Via this methodology, he, that is man, mankind, humankind, men and women, via this methodology, he creates an abstract conceptual framework, commonly mathematics, which then can be transferred and transmitted around the world with relative ease, in language, spoken and written, and used to whatever practical, like building a ship, or abstract, like charting a shipping route, end is desired. Science is a cognitive, conceptual tool the observer, mankind, uses to organize that which he observes, period, full stop, go no further. This is the sum and substance of science. Anything more than this is a lie. When I knew science had a big problem, I've known for a long time. The very first inclination I had that science had a philosophy problem or a metaphysics problem, or heck with that, just a fundamental rational consistency problem, was when I was 18 and I was at school and I saw a book by Stephen Hawkins, called A Brief History of Time. And years later I thought, that's a contradiction. I mean, time doesn't have a history, right? Time is the history. Like, time can't have its own timeline. That doesn't make it. That's a categorical. That's an infinite redundancy, right? So time can't have a timeline, and so that was one. And then you also hear things like, you hear like, and this is just off the cuff stuff that I would hear, but I started to get this inkling that science was going off the rails a little bit, or was going to, if it ever became that by which we defined our values. in the nature of our existence as human beings. You started to hear about wormholes. And again, I'm not a physicist, so I don't know if I'm explaining this absolutely correct, but I started to hear about wormholes, and wormholes were holes in space-time, but holes in space. And I was like, well, that's weird. How do you have a hole in space? Space is the hole. And then I started to hear about space as a coordinate system. Like it's a thing. Space isn't really just empty. It's not the absence of things. It's the thing itself. It's just that this thing is mathematical. So I'm like, wait a minute. That sounds like how does the location? It's a coordinate system. How does the location have its own location? How does space, if it's a thing, occupy space? I hear about things like gravitational waves of space-time. How do you have waves in a medium which you can't displace? Because where is it displacing into if not space? So how do you have space creating waves which are displacing into space? And as I heard Eric Weinstein say, well, space isn't nothing, space is a thing. There's a lot of stuff in space, and so that's why it can be displaced into space. But it's then what is the space that space-time is being displaced into so that it's a wave? Wouldn't that be the same kind of space, which is, you see what I'm saying? And then I read, I just kind of stumbled across a physics article, and the first sentence in the physics article I read online, I don't remember the periodical. Again, I'm just spitballing here. Just where I started to get the inkling that, oh my gosh, science is going to become a philosophy and we're dead. Because I don't think they're being ironical. I really don't think scientists understand or see the inherent contradiction in these claims. Like, there's problems here. If it was, like, if a brief history of time was just Stephen Hawking's being ironic, that's funny. Then good on it. But I have never read that was the point of the title. I've never heard Stephen Hawking say, I called it that because I was being ironic. I know that time doesn't have a history. Time is the history. Phrases like the beginning of time. Time is the beginning, the end of time. Time is the end of time. Time is a continuum. Past, present, and future are expressions of themselves. They're not distinct. Each one of them are an absolute function of the other. Time is like a circle. Like it just keeps going round and round. The past is a function of the present, is a function of the future, is a function of the past. This is a continuum. It doesn't have a beginning. Right? And I was like, well, I don't think that scientists are being ironic or funny. I think they really think that it makes sense. I really think Dawkins thinks his concept of the blind watchmaker, this sort of blind, unthinking, unconscious determinist force, I really do think that he thinks this represents some kind of a rational substitute for a conscious creator God. I don't think he's being ironical when he calls it the blind watchmaker. I think he thinks that this is a rational answer to God. I was like, we have problems here. He just made his God is this God, but God that doesn't. His God is like God, but his God is like dead. Blind meaning infinitely unconscious. It's like God, but there's no consciousness. So everything exists as it would exist under God, except that it can't have any intrinsic value or truth to it. And again, I don't want to get into Christian doctrine because the way, look, I'm not saying you should turn to your local church for the answers on these things. I'm just saying that these scientists, when they turn philosophers, they're as bad, if not worse. I was reading this article, and the first line of the article said, imagine a point so small that it can't be measured. And this person wasn't being ironic. Imagine a point in time. Well, there's no difference between saying that and imagine a point in time so big it can't be measured. Like, if you can't measure it, then how do you know it's small? Like, by definition, small is a relative measurement. If the point defies the ability of man to measure it in any sense, then it, as far as man is concerned, as far as the observer is concerned, it doesn't have a size, which means it can't be big or small. It's absolute. It's an infinite, which means it's mutually exclusive of size. It just is, right? It's an infinite singularity. So But he didn't know this, and so he thought that this was a clever, funny thing to say, which it is. And if you're staying in the realm of science, that's fine. But if you're building a philosophy and you're incorporating into your philosophy the idea that there are points so small they can't be measured, if that is something that you accept exists, there's a rational problem with the fundamentals of your philosophy, of your religion, you see. So I told you we'd only get through one paragraph, but anyway, so I'm going to stop there because I'm going to get spurgy, and I'm trying to stay calm and non-spurgy because I tend to get preachy, and I don't want to get preachy. But again, yeah, it's like, well, if you can't measure it, how the hell do you know it's small? If it defies measurement, which is what he's really saying, then you can't say it's small or big. You might as well say it's so big it can't be. It's cute in science, but once it steps out of science and becomes something we accept as possible, a point so small it can't be measured, like that's some kind of rational concept upon which we can build a description of the nature of man in reality, that's going to go bad really fast. And there's going to be a lot of torment and a lot of chaos and a lot of bloodshed if shit like that becomes the roots of human ideology, of the basis of how we define the nature of human existence. It's well, unfortunately, I suspect we won't have to wait too long to see how that all turns out, unless something changes with the thinking of our political classes. At any rate, all right, I'll stop there. We got through one paragraph exactly, which is fine. Like I said, I got all the time in the world. So I hope you have a good night, and thank you for listening, and like and subscribe if you want to. But other than that, I will see you later, and have a great rest of your week, and I will talk at you later. All right, take care. Bye.